My name is Loretta Schaefer Nelson. I was born May 30th, 1927, on a farm in Cedar Rapids, Nebraska, to William and Clara Schaefer. I was more of a loner because my sister always hung on to my mom, and I'd go out and play maybe under the windmill and have tea parties with I figured they were my cousins, but uh, they weren't there. I imagined them, and we would we made our own toys. I never had a doll until I was maybe 13, and life wasn't exactly easy for my parents. I remember all the hard times, and I remember carrying water from the windmill down a hill, and you'd have to climb that hill with the empty bucket, and then you'd have to fill it up and come back down. And sometimes it would be almost empty because we were so little, but we didn't complain. There was nothing to complain about because our parents did the best they could. My grandpa and Grandma Bittner lived maybe 2 miles from us, and we would walk up that hill to Grandma's house. And I remember family reunions mostly were all my uncles. I think there was about 12 kids in that family, and they were all have their girlfriends there, and that was the time that we couldn't go in to see our Aunt Emma because she had tuberculosis, and then we did lose her. But she was special. We would talk to her through the doorway, and she'd stay away from us so we wouldn't get it. But it was a good time with Grandpa and Grandma, and Grandma always made us little bags of candy at Christmas time, so we all had that. And one year, Grandma made me a special little dress, and it was gray with a purple uh, vest, and it. I just loved it, and I can still see it yet today because my grandma was very, very special.
Was that your grandma on your mom's side or dad?
Grandma Bittner.
Grandma Bittner.
And grandma Schaefer died very young. I remember going to her funeral, but Grandpa had us come and stay at his house when we made our first communion, and that's when I saw my first movie, and I thought all movie stars did was lay and eat bonbons, and but we thought our grandpa looked like Santa Claus because he had a beard, and he did look like Santa Claus. And he treated us very, very nice, and he always made his coffee, and then he'd soak his homemade bread in it. He always made his own bread. That's the German way. He was. Then we also made our confirmation there, and in the church in Cedar Rapids, Nebraska, which was the most beautiful church. I still think it is the most beautiful church there is today. But I don't think everybody else would agree with me. But it was a special time with our grandpa, and I'll never forget it.
Now I'm going to pause for a second. Are any of those pictures part of your grandma and grandpa? I'll get them. Okay. Let me pull those down.
Bittner.
Yeah. So let me pull those two down, and
I have Grandpa Schaefer's picture, I think, in the other room with he's the one looking weird.
Can we pause it about your mom and something special that you remember?
I just remember all the baking she did, and
Who?
my mom, Clara Bittner Schaefer, would can every year, and we all helped. But she was always working. I don't remember. She'd take a nap in the afternoon, about 10 minutes. That was it. She worked continually with 10 children. You don't waste any time, and she was a hard worker. And this picture is a picture of my mom and dad and my twin brothers. They were the oldest. And Wilford and I know them apart. Wilford was born a few minutes earlier than Alfred. He always said he was the oldest.
Oh, tell me a little bit about your dad.
But dad really worked hard too. He would he loved farming and wanted to move back, but mom wouldn't because it was the work was too hard. She said farming is too, you don't know when you're gonna, what the crops will be, the rain and all that. You had to go with the seasons, and she wasn't happy with that. So he worked for the last job. First, he worked as a mechanic. He took a car apart and put it back together, and also he worked for the soil conservation, which was making terraces on hills in the farm so that the soil wouldn't erode. But he was a hard worker, and he worked hard all his life.
Show us the picture.
I'm,
I'll show the picture. Paul. Okay. Three. Mom, why don't you tell us about your mom and dad and your brothers and sisters?
well, this is a family picture we had taken when my brothers came home on furlough during World War II. And my dad was very upset because had to go to war when he thought he fought in World War One, and that would be the end of wars. But I would tell you, this is my dad. This is my mom. This is my sister Mildred. Now, of course, this is me, my brother Bud, Laverne, Bill, Jimmy, Clary Ann, and Leroy. I forgot Alfred and Wilford.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say Alfred and Wilfred, but I think uh, this is Wilfred and this is Alfred.
There you go.
But
Why don't you share anything special about your brothers or sisters? Each of them, starting with Mildred. I mean, the brothers, twins.
I go with the twins. Well, when they were at home, uh, they watched Mildred and I real close. We didn't dare go out with certain guys because they weren't good enough, or you don't want to go with that guy because he's not a good guy. But other than that, the twins were always working. They'd work on farms or anything where they could get a job, and then they went into the military. And then Mildred was the oldest one that was home, and me. And she took care of my little sister, Clary Ann, and Leroy was my baby. And then with Bud, he was a entrepreneur. I think you'd have called him because he always said he had money in his pocket, which he did a lot of things that I could tell some stories about him, but I won't. And then there's Laverne, and he went into all my brothers went into the military, and the twins were in the army. Bud was in the Air Force. Laverne was in the army. Bill was in the army, and then it come to Jimmy. He was in the Marines, and I think that I got to Bill. The brothers that I really was close to mostly was my brother Leroy, and I am to this day. And Clary Ann was Mildred's little girl, so we had good times together, but we'd get together. This was a good family picture, and I'm glad we had it taken so that it's a good memory.
Great. So, Mom, I want you to tell me about this picture here, the year, the whole bit, and what it is, and how it all got set up.
This is our family picture again, our mom and dad, and my brothers and sisters. I think it was about around 1950, and because our brother Bud was in the Air Force at that time, and my twin brothers had been discharged. And I guess we'll start with me because this is me on the end, and Terry remembers the dress I wore because he said it was a copper satin dress, and it was. And that's been a long time ago. And this is my sister, Clary Ann. Leroy, this is mom. This is dad. This is Jimmy and Bill, Mildred, Alfred, Wilfred, Bud, and Laverne. And we never got together much because I was married and living in Lincoln at the time, and I had lived in a lot of little towns, which some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. But it was good. We always got together for some occasion, and everybody would be there, especially for Christmas.
All right, why don't you go ahead and show us this picture and tell us about this picture?
Start right now.
Hmm?
This is the last family picture we had taken, and it was when we lost our mom. It was a very sad time, but we all got together and got to have this picture taken, and I'm glad that we all did. Because it seemed like there always was one missing. Whenever there's a picture taken, I've got several pictures. There's always one of the brothers or sister. Clary Ann usually was there, but a few times she couldn't make it either. So uh, I will start with this is Laverne, Alfred. Of course, this is me. This is Jimmy, Mildred, Bud, Clary Ann, Bill, Wilfred, and Leroy.
Okay, great. Why don't you, while you have that picture showing, talk about their wives?
Wilfred married an English girl by the name of Grace, and she was blonde, and she came over to this country. She blended right in, and all her children now still live in Eugene, Oregon. Alfred, he lived in Albion for a while, and when being that we lived in California, he came to California also, and that he went to work for Hostess where my husband Len worked. And then we'll go to Bud, worked for the telephone company. He moved to Pennsylvania, so we didn't get to see him very often. But he was a great guy. And Laverne was married to a Pat. They also moved to Oregon, and then they followed all the rest of us to California and raised their children there. They had 3 boys. Bill, oh goodness, I think Bill had 4 children, but we weren't around him too often. But he was a good guy. He was always fun. Everybody loved to be around Bill. And I think that his children are like that today. And he was married to Shirley Morris, and Shirley's older sister was married to my Uncle Walt. So there was a double relative there. Then there was Jimmy. He married a little Scottish gal, and she was a little tiny thing. And when they were going to get married, I went with her to get a wedding. We couldn't find anything in her size because she was so small. So I suggested going to the little children's department in the little girls, and we found her a very beautiful little dress, and she really liked it, and it worked out beautiful. And then Leroy married Linda. She was from New York, and her parents came out for their wedding. And in later years, she ended up having Parkinson's and was disabled. And Leroy took excellent care of her, and she has passed away since. And Clary Ann married a gentleman by the name of Jim Robley, and he had 2 children when she married him, and they still to this day are in contact with me because they were good, really good children, and so were hers. And I guess that's how I got married. I got married on April 14th, 1940.
All right. Why don't you tell me about you and your school years growing up? Where did you go to school? Elementary school and high school?
I started school in Cedar Rapids, Nebraska, and was a one-room schoolhouse, and it was District 81. And I went through to the fourth grade, and then we moved to Albion, but on the farm. But there was a guy, a young kid that was always teasing me, and I wore a little red and white tam, and he would throw it in the ditch because there were some bulls in there, and he knew I was afraid of them. But his sister found out, and she punished him, so he paid for it. And then I'll go into later what went on with Junior Zuha. Anyway, then we moved to Albion, and on the farm, Mrs. Maxwell was our teacher, and it was Junior Zuha's sister. Then in Albion, Mrs. Barrett, and she was so good to us because we were new, Mildred and I, in her class, and they had 5th and 6th grade together. And that year, Mildred just had a real rough time, so we ended up in the same grade. But in the next year, they put us in different classes because they never liked to have siblings in the same grades. And I had, in the 5th grade, I had Mrs. Wright, and she treated me so good. And I had have a tooth pulled, and that night it bled all night long, and I was so weak the next day I couldn't go to school. And then when I came back, she treated me like royalty, and she put me in an operetta where I was a little Dutch girl. And then we went into high school, and that was interesting because it ended up during World War II, which we ended up having older gentlemen as our teachers, and we had Mr. McNally. He was really good, and his brother was in the Navy, and we were all loved him because he told us about all the adventures that his brother had in the Navy. And also we got letters from my brothers, and during speech class we had to give a speech, and my brothers both had gotten the Purple Heart, and I was up first, and Mr. Leach said, well, Loretta, give your speech. And I told him about my brother Alfred getting the Purple Heart, and went through that. And then my sister Mildred, he called her up, and she said, my brother Wilfred got a Purple Heart. And she gave the same speech as I did, and everybody laughed. And they said we copied one another, but we didn't. And then we went on. I'm trying to think of different. Well, I did get a little letter in they called it gym in those days, gymnastics, and I got a letter A. And then I was writing to my brother's buddies in the service, and I ended up, I was, from school, I ended up getting married.
Well, why don't you tell us why you left school and what happened?
I left school to get married because I loved him. I married Leonard Nelson, and he was from Omaha, Nebraska.
How'd you meet him?
I wrote to Leonard he wrote me a letter, and it was all about my brothers. He was, what good buddies they were and everything. And then we wrote to each other for 18 months, and he ended up in Fitzsimmons General Hospital because he was blown out of a foxhole, and I hadn't heard from him for a while, and I thought that something happened to him. But before I met him, I had gone to Omaha, and met his parents, which was, and they treated me like royalty. And then when in December of 1944, uh, he sent me a beautiful Christmas card, and I still have it today. And he said he tried to get home for Christmas and couldn't, and he come home at December 7th of 1940. I met him, and when he come in the door, he came in, put his arms around me, and kissed me, and that was it. And we were married on April 14th, 1945.
Well, tell us about when you got married, about the embroidery you made.
Well, I didn't have a big wedding. My Leonard's mother and dad were our witnesses, and we went into the courthouse on a Saturday
Where?
in Omaha, Nebraska, and the judge's name was Judge Troyer. And we were married in just a few minutes. And to me, I never ever thought about having a big wedding, but I did do an embroidery of our wedding, of a wedding picture. And of course, there will be a picture of it that everybody can see. Uh,
Okay. Where did you honeymoon?
or what? Honeymoon? Oh, we went our honeymoon. We got married in the afternoon, and the next morning we went to Chicago to visit Leonard's grandparents because he hadn't seen them for several years because he had been in the military. And his parents went with us, and of course, Leonard's little sister, Bonnie. And we went to see different shows. His uncle is younger than him, but his name is Donald, and his wife, and I can't remember her name because he had been married a couple of times. And we went to Indiana to see different shows, and it was just a good honeymoon. And then my husband got to talk to his Richie Ashburn. He was with the Philadelphia Phillies at the time, and they had gone to school and played ball together in Tilden, Nebraska. And so it was uh, it was really a good honeymoon, and enjoyed every minute. And we have pictures of us kissing in the photo booth.
All right. While we're on Dad's mom and dad, talk about Dad's mom and dad and their names, and also Vern and Bonnie.
Well, Len's dad's name is Leland, and of course I named Terry. His middle name is also Leland after him, and uh, his mother's name is Esther Ellen Nelson, and her maiden name was Dobney. Dale, his middle name is Allen after her. But and then Len had a little sister. There was 13 years difference between them, and every time that if Len bought me anything, a gift, and when we were first married, she had to have one too, and so we couldn't afford to buy her one. So Grandpa would always, or his Leonard's dad would buy her one because she was their princess.
What about Vern?
And then he had a brother Vern that was in Guadalcanal when we were married, in the Navy, and he was a medic. And he came home, and he married a young lady by the name of Mary, and they had a little daughter by the name of Sandra. And uh, to this day, I wish I knew where she was. But Vern was worked for a furniture store, and we were close friends. We went to a lot of country music shows, the town hall party, the barn dance. Even in the daytime, I could name a lot of the older country stars that nobody ever heard of.
Okay. Um, why don't you tell us about when you and Dad were expecting your first baby?
Oh boy. Uh, when we found out we were going to have a baby, because I didn't realize it, but when Len was discharged from the army, they told him he'd never have children. And there was a group of servicemen. And then they held about six back and said, "You will never have children. We're sorry, but this is what the military did to you." And, but I think it kind of fooled them. And I say, thank God they all looked like him and they all had brown eyes. So everybody teased us about it. But when I was expecting Lenny, I was sick for 10 months, and he was a 10-month baby. No one said there was no such thing, but I started throwing up in June until he was born. And he was born on April 22nd, 1946. And then, should I go on to
Yep.
you?
Keep going all the way through.
And then we got another surprise. I was pregnant again, and then Terry came along, and he was my little boy that I named him after a comic strip in the newspapers that we had our heroes during World War II, and his name was Terry, and he was with the pirates, and he was a military guy, and I just worshipped him. Because at 14, what do? You worship the comic strip. Anyway, Terry was special. He never gave a bit of problems. He slept and he never complained. And he was such a little guy. And then he had blonde curly hair. Uh, I'm not going to say
Go
what
ahead.
they
Go
said
ahead.
about
No,
him,
go ahead.
about you being a girl or a
Yeah,
boy.
go ahead. Say.
One day, the neighbors, he was about wanting just running around, and in our area, the kids would cross the street. There never was any traffic like there is today, and he was always running over to this neighbor's house. And one day they had he had curly hair, and they had company. And this lady, she said, "Are you a girl or a boy?" And he come home and he said, "Mommy," and I said, "What?" He said, "Am I a girl or a boy?" I said, "You're a boy." And I shaved his head. And I did that with all the boys, because that getting a haircut at a barber shop would cost arm and leg, and we couldn't do it in those days. Then Larry came along in 1950, and he was a little different. He was rambunctious, energetic, and he kept us on our toes. And uh, there never was a time that if anything went on, Larry was involved. Then
Let's see. Well, I've got to ask you about leaving Nebraska.
yeah,
What
that
brought it
that
all
was
about?
just one when we were living in Kearney, Nebraska, and I really wasn't happy there. And, Len came home one day and he said, "Where do you want to move? Omaha or California?" Well, was there a choice? And I said, "California." And a friend of ours was moving or coming out to California to see if he could get a job out here. And, they came out, and there was some people they knew by the name of Wrights, and they had a place in Len they said he got an apartment and, or a motel room, of course.
How did Dad get to California?
Dad came out with a friend. I'm not sure his name. I think his name was Len. They drove out and they stayed at a motel. And Dad kept writing. He wrote a long letter, which at that time I didn't think he'd ever write that long a letter again since he was out of the military. And he kept saying how bad the traffic was in California, and watch out for the traffic. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful. And then he went to look for a job, and he had been a milkman in Nebraska. So he went to a different dairy. He went to this one dairy, and it was privately owned, and it was called Quinn's Dairy, and he worked for them. He went to work for them, so he got the job. Then he said for Clarianne and I to come out. That's when he was telling us how terrible the traffic was.
What kind of car?
It was a little Chevrolet. I don't know if it was a 40. I'm not sure. It was an older car, but it was a four-door. We had it full, and we put a plywood in the back. Clariana, I put plywood in the back. And put blankets and quilts and stuff on it so it'd be comfortable for the boys to ride. And they took turns sitting in the front seat. And in those days, there was no seat belts, so we didn't have to have that. We were extra careful, and we went through New Mexico, and we were short of gas, and everything was closed up, and we. Uh, Saw a phone number on this one filling station, and we called him, and he said he put gas in our car, and he said if you want to spend the night the gas will be free, and we said no thank you. And so we come straight through, and then we got to uh Hoover Dam. It's not Hoover Dam today. We had a vapor lock in this Chevrolet. And what that meant, I haven't the foggiest, but the car wouldn't run, and we had to wait a while. And whatever it was, somebody took care of it for us, because there was always people were so helpful in those days. They just went over backwards, especially a woman and two women with three kids. And then we drove on from I think that's Nevada, on into California, and we met up with Len. He was so happy to see us. It was just like we had just got married all over again. Anyway, being that he was working, we looked for he looked for a place for us to live, because I couldn't do anything because I had three kids and Clarianne. And he found a place, and it was right on close. All you had to do is step out the door and go a few steps, and you were on the beach. It was rented for $6 a month. He didn't, as being that he hadn't got a paycheck yet. The lady lived in Palo Verdes, and she says, I'll let you move in, and then you can pay me when you get paid. And see how people in those days were really generous and helpful. And we lived by the beach, and I wrote back to everybody, and I said, my kids' playground is the beach. It was wonderful. They really liked it. Then we moved to a place in Hermosa Beach, because it was a little bit bigger and better. That was friends of ours own that. And I'm trying to think of how we're, then we were trying to get a place under the GI Bill. Finally, it went through, and that was when we moved on to Sepulveda. And it cost
That
us.
was in Torrance?
It was in Torrance, and thank you. Then we bought the house, and it cost us $6 to move in, and we got the key. And I can't remember the rent, but I know it was very nominal. It was very little rent. But in those days, you didn't make any money either. It was $100 a month. That's what your dad made.
Well, it was a mortgage, wasn't it?
And it was mortgaged. Yeah, it was under the GI Bill. So then
So where did you and Dad work?
I didn't work right away. Oh, I did too. Dad worked for Quinn's Dairy, and I went to work for a dry cleaners because I'd worked for one in Nebraska. The gentleman that hired me, his name was Dale Stucker, and he hired me because I was from Nebraska, because he said anyone from Nebraska knows how to work and they work hard. That I worked several years for, I don't know just how long. Oh, and then I got pregnant with Dale.
Tell us about that.
With Dale,
One.
Mom, tell us about when you found out you're expecting Dale, having Dale, and then
let's see, it said we moved into our house on Sepulveda, and surprise, 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 found out we were expecting another baby. And of course, Lennox thought maybe it would be a girl, but we he arrived at December 27th of 1950, and 5 months later, he got real sick and had to have surgery. His bowel telescoped, and we had to. He was at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and they didn't have an ambulance to take him. It was on a Saturday, and they didn't have an ambulance to take him from the doctor's home to the hospital. And they told us just speed, and if somebody stops you, just tell them what's going on and keep going. And but nobody stopped us. But at the doctor's house, that's where we went to take Dale because he was so sick. His son was watching real close of what his dad was doing, and they both told us goodbye. We made it to Children's Hospital. Dale had his surgery and got through it really good, and then got him home. And a few days later, IM reached, and my blood count went down to 6, and they rushed me to the hospital, and I had to have several blood transfusions, and I took all the blood that they had at the blood bank at the time, and I think it was 4. So I made it through that. Trying to think of what went on after Dale. And like I said, we never lost that baby, and it just was hard. It was hard for all of us. And then
what happened to the house and everything?
I will say this: when Larry was, like I said, Larry was rambunctious. We thought one day he was just a little guy. Yeah, just right after Dale was born, we thought that he went to the neighborhood somewhere and didn't tell us. We looked everywhere for him, and here he had rolled on the side of the bed, and he was covered up with all the blankets, and we couldn't see him. And I was thrilled to death when we found him. I was scared to death we was going to lose him too. And then what next?
Losing the house and moving to an apartment.
Oh, when we didn't have any hospitalization, and we had a agent come out and tell us that there was nothing he could do for us, and we had to let the house go. And we moved to a house. It was on Harvard, close to a railroad tracks by a Torrance Park, and I didn't know it, but I found out in later years that the boys were grabbing that train rails and riding on the train. I think that's what you did. And it not only was one of them, it was all of them. And here I thought Larry was the naughty one. But From then,
Why don't you talk about Casimir?
then we moved to Casimir. We ended up that we bought a house. We were able to save enough to buy a house, and we bought this house on Casimir, and it's across the street from the school. And we met two good friends, Dave and Trudy Hardy, and trying to think of what. A lot of water's run under the bridge.
They had a daughter, Vicky.
The what?
They had a daughter, Vicky.
And they had Dave and Trudy had a daughter, Vicky. And when we bought the house, they had they had two chihuahuas. And one was crippled. And we told them they could leave the dog when they left. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that. But when they moved out, they left a little dog, and her name was Troubles. And the boys were crazy about her. And we had her for a number of years. And from there,
Talk about Jim and Leroy moving to Ardith and what they did for our family and help.
I can't remember
Okay.
the Terry. Jim came out. Jim and my brother Bill came out to California living. I think we were living on Spovada, and Bill and his wife Shirley and Jim came out together, and I took Bill out to look for jobs, and I think also Jim was looking for a job too, and then trying to think, Clarianne got a job at Harvard. It was an ammunition place, and that was also in Torrance. And we all liked Torrance, and I think the boys liked school there. And with when Dale was in. This is my grandpa Schaefer, my dad's father, and he's the one we stayed with when we were made our first communion and confirmation. And he was funny. He made his own bread. He did everything himself, and that is the first place I ever saw an inside bathroom. And we always had the outhouses, which wasn't a fun time, but that's the way that life was in those days. But he was very special, and I will never forget when he passed away, because I got to go to his funeral. I must have been about 10 years old, and got to see a whole lot of relatives that I didn't know who they were. But he's still very special to me.
Tell us who these people are.
This is my mother's mother, and this is when she was. Is it up on that? So when she was a little girl, this is her, and this is my grandpa Bittner, my mother's father, and this is their wedding day. This was my grandpa, and this is my grandma, and of course, my mother wasn't there, and neither was I. But it was a very special day for them. And I've heard a lot of good things about them throughout the years. And their parents immigrated from Germany, and they lived in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, when they first come to our country.
All right. Share with us about this, folks.
And this is when they were older. What I really remember about my grandpa and grandma Bittner, this is my mom's, of course, my mom's dad and mom, and grandma. She, like I said, she was just a special lady, and all the kids she had. She never ever complained when all the grandkids came, because there was a bunch of us, and there was, especially on my mother's side. She had a lot of them. The other ones had maybe 4 or 5 children. So this is, I think you got my grandma and grandpa.
All right. Tell us about any of your aunts and uncles that you remember, their names and anything you remember.
Well, the special one is our Uncle Bill. I think Uncle Bill Bittner, my mother's brother. And when he was young, he could never go into the military because he had been bucked off of a horse and broke his arm. And so but there was something special about him that we all loved. He made us all feel like we were his favorite. And I like to be a favorite occasionally. And then there was our youngest aunt was Aunt Evelyn, and we used to go out and visit on her farm. And when they had threshing day, that was special with the farmers, and we would go and because I was young and I was supposed to take care of the little ones, but we rode a horse down to a country store, and boy, talk about a bareback ride on a horse. You know that your bottom gets a little sore, but it was fun.
One.
You embroider. That's a kind of a lost art. Why don't you share some of your embroidery and talk about it?
Well, I usually make things that I hope that people will like, and I make it for the extravaganza at the Boys and Girls Club, and they use it for different items that they want to sell at auction.
Why don't you hold up the cow so people can see that one?
Here's my little cowboy. I like him. And this is something new I've just done. Is a Mexican. I done a Mexican set, and I tried to get bright colors because I know that the Mexican culture is that they like bright colors, and so do I.
Right, now, we're gonna just talk about your life overall. Right now, you're 96 years old, and you've seen a lot of changes. What would you say about your entire 96 years? Some sad moments, some great moments.
Well, let's see. There's been a lot, and a lot I've forgotten. I'm sorry to say that it would come back if I'd sit down and really think about it. Because even with all my family, I enjoyed the family reunions we had in Nebraska, and every year I get to see. Especially I stayed with Pete and Teresa. Teresa's Mildred's daughter, and her little girl, Michelle, and Katie, and I would play Go Fish. And of course, Michelle liked to win. And she just recently sent me a picture of her and me together. And when the last one I went to, we went to the Catholic Church in Cedar Rapids, and Wilford and Alfred, Mildred, and I made our first communion, also our confirmation, and I think it's the most beautiful church I've ever been in. And also, that was the day that Tom Bittner gave me a ride on his motorcycle, which I really enjoyed. Just a few years before, Lee Morris gave me a ride, so I felt real good about that. One of the special highlights of my life was when a retired police officer took me all around Palm Springs on his route of where he patrolled, and I really enjoyed that. And
What about some of all the fishing trips when we were kids and
Oh.
growing up, and the boats you had and the lakes?
we had, it seemed like the first one was called Bub's Tub. That was when Grandpa Nelson, Terry's grandpa, and his dad made that boat. And, but it floated, and they caught a lot of fish on it, and that was at Johnson's Lake in Nebraska. And I don't think there was very few lakes around. If there was one, there was a lake we would fish in it, And one of the highlights I liked was the belly boats, and I couldn't swim stroke, but I'd make sure I didn't go out too far.
What was the belly boat?
It was a boat with that you had the boots,
Waders.
waders, and up, and then it had a floating tube around your stomach.
An inner tube.
Yeah. When Larry first went in one, he flipped over. And boy, it scared the life out of everybody, and he wasn't too happy about that. So I don't know if he liked the belly boats or not.
Well, what about all the trips we took to Vegas?
We went with a lot of times we went with Russ and Nancy, and there isn't. I know one time we had to rush back because Russ's stepmother was very ill, and we never even we just got there and we turned around and came back, and usually Terry and Dale would stand outside and wait so patiently for us, and they'd walk back and forth, and we felt so bad because it was hot out there, but they won't let them in.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit. What do you plan to do on your 100th birthday? It's 4 years away.
Well, I hope that Terry will have a birthday party for me, a big one, and invite a lot of people like Bob Shremmett Casey, and trying to think of all the ones I really, really like. And they all know who they are, so I don't think I have to mention names. But I will invite Stephen because he takes the pictures, and we need him. Yeah.
And some final words. Anything that you want to talk about, whether it be the grandkids or the changes you've seen in your life or the friends you've made, anything that comes to mind.
Well, I wouldn't make any changes because it wouldn't do any good anyway. So praying towards. So I would say that I enjoyed our Sunday dinners with Leroy and Jimmy, and that was a highlight. And I think that a good share of our life was, and my life wasn't too bad, and I really enjoyed every job I ever had, and I made it special. Even I worked in electronics, and when I left at a Magnavox Research Lab to move to Spokane, Washington, the CEO said I didn't know what I did to the foreman, but he said he'd give me a really good resume, and I thought, wow, because I didn't even think George liked me.
Well, if you had to pick one of the two, either marrying Dad or having kids, which would be the highlight of the two?
That's that wasn't nice. I love your dad. I was so in love with him, and I said a lot of people they say, "Well, I love you," and I do say that to a lot of people, and I do love him. But when you're in love, it's entirely a different feeling. And I was in love with your dad, and then as each one of you guys came along, each one was special. Lenny was different. He did he was a 10-month baby, he walked soon and everything, and you were so special. You never cried, even if you wet your panties out your diapers. You just laid in it, and I'd say, Terry, why did you cry? And you just look up at me and smile. And can I tell about the potty?
I don't care.
One day when Terry, I was potty training him, and he would always go in there and sit for a while, and he sat and went in and sat on the potty, and because we always had the individual ones, we didn't have him sit on the big one. All at once he says, "Mommy, lingerling, lingerling, mommy." And after that, whenever he had to go potty, he'd say, "Lingerling, mommy." He never said out loud, but he always made sure that I'd take him potty.
What about Larry?
Larry was, oh, he was active. He never sat still a minute, and the neighbors were always coming and bringing him back home because he would visit everybody. He was very uh, outgoing, and he was musical. He played the trumpet, and he was in parades, and it was great. And then Dale came. What a surprise for all of us! But it was a good surprise. And 5 months after he was born, he had to have surgery. We almost lost him, and at the same time, I nearly hemorrhaged to death, and Len almost lost both of us at the same time. And I guess that's why Len was a little bit closer to Dale because of the sickness he went through. And I know that Larry was jealous, but you can't be when you have a sick child. It's different. Life is different.
Let's end it on a fairly upbeat note. What would you want people to remember you for?
I guess just being there. Whenever, if you need me, I'll be there. And I would hope that the Boys and Girls Club would remember me. And I hope my kids don't forget me. And I still have 2 brothers left, and I don't want them to forget me and all my relatives. I do hear from lots of them. So I appreciate that. I just can't think of anything more that I would need or want. I'm satisfied with the way things are right now.
Well, I can honestly say that you've loved and you are loved in the family and the community.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for taking the time. Any final words you'd like to say, or?
Well, I'd like to thank you for doing this, and thank you, Stephen, for taking the pictures. And it's nice looking at you while you're doing it, and also looking at you, Terry. I appreciate that too.
Well, thank you, Mom. We love you.
Love you too.
Love you.
Love you.